We are pleased to invite Chiquito, who has flown in 13 hours from Israel just to come and present to all of us about her experience. She is a lawyer who fights for deaf rights and equality. Please, before we begin, make sure that you sign the attendance sheet in the back, and there is free food. Be conscientious of other people wanting food, so take a limited portion and share. And so go ahead, grab a bite to eat, and then we will begin the presentation.
Oh, no, 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 no.
Hello, testing, 1, 2. Hello. Is that better? Yes. It's too loud. I'm a loud guy. Testing, 1, 2, 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2, 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2, 1. Okay, not too loud. One shekel.
Monetarily challenged. Okay, everybody. We're going to go ahead and start the presentation. If you are still getting your food, please gather that up and then take your seats. Before we begin, just letting you know there will be a little bit of a mixture of sign language going on here between ASL and elementary students, so please make sure that Good evening, everyone. It's so great to see you all here. How's the food? Good? Is there any hummus back there? Yeah? All right. As we've mentioned, I use the Universal Sign Language as well as ASL. If you're not understanding something that I'm signing, please feel free to interrupt and I will clarify and repeat that, okay? Like I say, I just flew into Rochester. Oh, I've been here before. My husband was actually born in the States. And his family is from LA, California. His parents grew up there, and they 4 siblings. 3 of them are hearing, and the youngest is deaf. He was put in a Jewish school for the deaf.
Unfortunately, there was no sign language there. And then at night, they would have the evening activities and they get together with all of the deaf Jewish children. There were deaf Jewish children to get together with. And so they called them all to get together in a certain place. But for him, it was still a very isolating experience. The three hearing children got along great, but he was always being left out. And then they moved to Israel, where there was a school for the deaf, and grew up there. And that's their story. And we had come and visited his family from time to time, 5 times over the course of the years. But this is my first visit here to Rochester. 13-hour flight, I have to tell you. There was the man sitting behind me, kicking my seat the entire time. Come on! Every time I would try to just doze off. So I feel as if my eyes might be a little red at this stage. Flew into New York City, and then took the transition flight to Rochester. Now, gotta let you know. Prior to landing, we're in the airplane, the fuselage, and you're on the tarmac. And there is a sign, Shirley Pinto, somebody is holding. And I'm thinking, as I'm walking out, are you trying to get me or what? And so I walk over them and they put me on a wheelchair. I'm thinking, what the is, no, I can walk. They're saying, the chair is for you, come on, sit in the chair. I can walk, I don't need that part. It was rather comical. So finally get on the plane and the turbulence was horrible. It was bouncing all over. And I was thinking, well, maybe it's the snow, I don't know. But, just keep in mind in Israel it's very hot, so the snow thing is a little different. I mean, there's not a great deal of snow, but a little bit out there is what we're used to. So the flight was very turbulent, felt like it was holding on for dear life. Finally landed a little smooth, kept thinking at any moment my head was going to be bumping up on the baggage storage area. But it was all right, and it was great to be here. Love seeing you all, and looking forward to a great evening. When I was thinking about this evening, I was thinking about my experience in the IDF, Israeli military. I'm trying to think, should I talk about that, or should I talk about my life? And I went, well, but my life also talks about how deaf people can be involved in the military, so I will be talking about that. My parents are deaf, and they were in a northern town, Haifa, in Israel. And of course, when I was born, my parents were, yes, deaf child. My mother grew up deaf. And at 20 years old, started to lose her sight. She came down with Usher's syndrome, and her eyesight had been decreasing since. By the time I was born, it was very limited. It's very difficult for her to see. So my parents are deaf. And my father was always be looking around at the hearing people. Or when I was growing up, I'd ask my father, what are those people doing? Why are they all moving their mouth? Why aren't they signing? I didn't understand this all the time. And he had to explain to me that we are deaf and they are not. And so I just kept thinking how exciting it was for me that I had a language that utilized my eyes and they didn't. And I kept looking at everybody talking. How many of them were talking all the time to each other, no matter where we were when we were out on the streets? And I realized that there were so many more of them than us. going to school, I had a similar experience. All of the classrooms were hearing, except the one smaller classroom for the deaf students with an instructor who signed. And it wasn't signing like we use conversationally. It was very, very limited, very formal, very slow. No life to it at all. And I was thinking how the hearing students read books, got ready to go to college, learned all of this at the pace of their life as compared to what I was experiencing in the deaf classroom, and kept approaching the instructor saying, I really want to get into that other classroom. And I was thinking, oh, have an interpreter in there, they would sign up to speed. It was great and very interactive. After high school, getting ready to go to college, I was thinking, well, what do I want to do? Keep in mind that the culture in Israel is mandatory for everyone who can hear to go into the military after high school graduation. It's just the way it is. Everybody serves. And I saw that with my hearing peers, and I wanted the same experience. Didn't view myself as being deaf then. Wanted to have that experience just like everybody else. And I didn't label myself as disabled. Now, the people who do have that label in Israel have a choice. They can either join military service or not, whatever they prefer. And I think that's a wonderful choice to have. So I filled out the paperwork, sent it all off to the military office, and got the approval. And when I first went in, I was very nervous. Keep in mind, there were no interpreters at all, and everybody is speaking. No interpreters are allowed. And if they had an interpreter, they had to bring him in from the outside, and they didn't know the environment. And even then, it was very rare, if ever. So there was a lot of writing that took place in order to allow the communication to happen with me. Okay, let me back up a little bit. When I was a kid, I remember probably 4 or 5, thinking about, what's going on, taking all the selfies to Facebook, all these things that are going out in the culture, and texting and sharing information with everyone. We didn't have that. And thinking about our friends, what time are we going to meet? Where are we going? So when I was around 5, I believe it was one evening, my parents were finished with work. There was this great big box that they brought home and opened. And it was a fax machine. I remember looking at it going, what the heck is that for? And they were saying, well, it's a fax machine. You can use it to communicate with people. You can write a message on this piece of paper, type in the phone number, and send the piece of paper off to your friend. Oh, okay. So I tried it. I wrote him a note to send to my friend from school, and I was thinking, because, the paper goes in the machine, and I would think that it would be sailing across the wind to get to my friend's house. I'm thinking, how the heck does this work? I didn't know. Whenever I was a little kid. So I type in the number, and then I run to the other side to wait to see where the paper goes. My parents, of course, are playing on this game. I'm going, oh, no, there it goes. You missed it. It's already gone. So we did it again, and I ran to try to see. And I'm thinking, this paper is going really quick. I sent all of these papers off to my friend to try to figure out and try to see this paper flying as it left the fax machine. So, going back to my military experience. was a time when my father wanted to go to the bank. He had to give somebody some money. And trying to figure out how to do this, you had to think about it. You couldn't just, I can't just call, or my father couldn't just call. He was deaf. So my younger brother is hearing. So my father would write everything up and go into the classroom, get my brother, would let the teacher know that he needed my brother to come and help him. And he would bring him out of the class and say, I need you to call the bank for me. At this point, my brother was 5. 5! Just a little boy. You need me to call the bank? Okay. So Dad dials the bank, and of course it's a hearing person that answers. And they hear the voice of a child. Hi. How old are you? I'm 5. And the bank probably hung up. Dad's not sure what to do now, but these are all these obstacles that my parents would face. And he would have to fight for everything that he wanted. And again, remembering that my mother's vision was declining and being deaf, it was hard for her to interact with people, especially deaf and blind. Many people would dismiss her. If you were deaf, they would say, oh, you poor thing. But deaf and blind, it was doubly so. And there's no support services advocacy for anyone to fight for people with these dual disabilities. And people just tell them no. People will provide Braille, but it wasn't always effective, and they wouldn't always provide it. And there was always that fight of declaring, I am a person, and see me as that. But that's how I grew up. So then I progressed through school and get through college, sign up for the military service. And my mother would always say, don't tell anybody I'm blind. Just don't. Because she didn't want people looking at her differently. And I kept saying, but if you don't tell anybody that you need help, how can they help you? I was looking on the internet about an Israeli TV show for people, or Israeli show theater for people who were deaf. Deaf-blind theater. And saying, this is a way that you can get out and show people what you can do. And so I really encouraged her to go and to try it out. And it was a comedy, actually, and I said, you should go and you should try it. So took my mother there the first time to the theater, and a little hesitant, but they provided a lot of access and a lot of communication assistance, tactile signing, and other things. And it opened up a whole new world for her. She was able to get out some of that emotions and turmoil that she had been keeping down inside of her. But meanwhile, I was going back and forth to school to help her. And then my parents separated. My father moved to Tel Aviv, and my mother was Haifa. And this is how these two cities are signed. So I was approved to be a volunteer in the military. And again, like I say, for hearing people, it was mandatory service. For those of us who were deaf, it was voluntary service. But you had a lot of paperwork and other qualifications you had to go through to actually get in. And that was the struggle that I was pursuing, because I wanted to be seen on par with my peers, with my hearing peers. So after you get the paperwork done, you have to more and more anxious. I was working, but I had to tell them I didn't know how long I was going to be able to work because I wasn't sure when the military was going to be calling me. And I remember my parents and the life and the upbringing that I had with them and the challenges that they faced. And that I kept all of that with me. And I wanted to do something to try to change that. I wanted them to have access. I wanted them to have an ADA and the laws to support them. Here, you have the FN system. I didn't have that. It didn't exist. That wasn't an option for me. And my parents went through this as well. This was the life that they had. Sitting back and keeping my mouth shut was not for me. That was not something I was going to do. So, remember, I had been waiting to hear from the military, and that year was very difficult on me, but I went through a lot of changes. I started really standing up for myself, and finally I got the call. I knew that I was going to be able to prove myself. I saw what the hearing people were doing, and I knew I could do that. And I went into the military office, and they asked me, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I could teach sports to people, and I was always athletic, and so I was ready for that aspect of things. I said, okay. And I know in the two cities, Tel Aviv and Haifa and the other cities, they're very different depending on where you are. And so this particular place was out in the middle of nowhere. And every place that you go was a new and a different experience. The culture is different, the people, how they live, the cities, the traffic, all of that is very different. And I was, all right, I'm ready for this. I know where I'm going, I know how to get there. Packed my bags all up, said goodbye to the parents. And I said, I'm going on my new journey. Get on the bus. And remember, I was thinking about the bus experiences I had when I was a child, growing up, and people would always say, you know, there would always be a teacher or someone there that I could ask for help, or there would be an interpreter there who I could ask for help. There were captions there. There was lots of assistance for me growing up. And now here I am thinking, it's just me. There's no one else for me to call on for help. I said goodbye to my parents and was truly on my own. And that's when I really decided I needed to figure out how to help myself.
So on the bus, we traveled through a number of communities, and I kept making eye contact with people on the bus. We came to a stop at the Army base, and there were armed guards as we came in. I showed them my cards and got ready to get processed. They wished me good luck. And there was an officer there who asked if he could help me. I indicated that I was deaf. He said, "You don't hear at all? And you don't speak?" I said, "No, I use sign language." So we started writing back and forth. And mentioned Haifa in the north. I let him know that's where I was from. Asked if they had interpreters available. And they didn't. They looked at me like I was some sort of alien creature. And then people didn't like that. So I didn't catch what he was saying. And I asked him if there were other deaf soldiers. I told them I don't use my voice at all. I don't speak. So I was kind of at a loss. And I kept running into all these obstacles and barriers now. The officer said, well, we'll deal with it tomorrow. And I said, tomorrow? So we went off, and I was pretty much all alone. I was a little nervous. It was like I kept getting shunted aside. I thought, I can't deal with this for a year of nothing but obstacles and barriers. I felt like all this stuff was going on around me and none of it was going right. I didn't know where I could turn for help. Like I said, I was on my own. Now, the Army has a program to help disabled people, but I don't think there was anything available for folks related to sign language or who were deaf or communicated visually. For other disabilities, they had formal programs. Now, at that point, my husband wasn't yet my husband, but we were in a relationship and going together. So about 5 at night, I meet friends, then be out in Los Angeles. You know, the time difference. Now with the Army, the hearing folks get together and just chat to pass the time. And again, I was treated like some outsider, some alien. This went on for a month or two, and I was really, really discouraged. And I told the commanding officer, I think I'm transferring to another base. I was going to stay in the IDF, but I was going to move to a different base. And I told, you know, they discouraged me from moving, but I told them I can't put up with this. So I was thinking about moving, and I moved to Tel Aviv. Now, Tel Aviv's a large city, and they're much more aware of deaf people. It's much more cosmopolitan. They had deaf volunteers. They had a deaf volunteer was in for a year, another hearing volunteer was there for 3 years. And I didn't know what I'd do as I served my time. I was looking for work to do or something to do, so I relocated to Tel Aviv. And they filled out and approved all the paperwork, and when the transfer was approved, I was eager to get out of there. I joyfully said goodbye. I was all excited. But people were different. It's like they looked right through me. I was leaving, but it was, well, whatever. And I got to the new base, said hello to people, said I was deaf, and they kind of didn't really welcome me, but they did welcome me, but they didn't sign. At the same time, they looked at me as if I were a person, a human being. I was no longer an alien. And I told them it was real difficult at the other base, and was looking for what I could do, and trying to come up with a new job or job duties. And we hit upon the Air Force. I had the Air Force uniform. You'll see it in the picture. Now, different from the Army, the Air Force had a number of disabled people serving. Some people were in wheelchairs. Some people had other disabilities. Some worked in a typing pool. They had different jobs that disabled people were doing on the aircraft itself. They had electronics, things related to the flight, and you know, I got approved to, you know, they collected the fees, whatever it was. They could check flight numbers and coordinate those with ships, kind of handle travel itineraries. So when the sailors came in, they'd figure how many sailors were coming in, how many people would be working on the aircraft, schedule work shifts. So it was kind of a lot of logistics. So that's just an example, you know, with 50 people, but there's thousands really. So we're trying to come up with some good job duties. There were 50 flights. 25 were half of those. Oh, it's like up in France, there were 25 boxes coming in from France. They'd have to track where they were going, and it was logistics, almost like a quartermaster. How much they needed to pay us, how much money we'd get back. So it was that sort of bookkeeping and accounting and logistics. And a lot was handled by email. I kind of liked that. You know, it was things that were accessible via email. And I talked to some hearing friends who were in the Army. They were interested in learning some sign language, or some of them knew a little, and it was great. So we could communicate by email, got in touch with each other, and set up, we figured out what weeks we could meet, and set up a meeting, started teaching sign language. Now, we didn't have interpreters, but it was on the base, right there. You know, basic sign language, hello, goodbye, ABCs, teaching people to finger spell in Israeli Sign Language, in ISL. And the next day I get up and say good morning, and at least we could communicate at that level. And there started to be a group that could communicate. Then after a year, well, I volunteered for a year and a half. And younger Israeli people were joining the army. Normally, they join for a 3-year term of duty. And when the army sees they're really willing, and there's a person who wanted to stay in the army, they could stay longer. So you could actually get employed by the army, get a job in the army, and you'd get a different uniform, and you know, it was great. So you could re-up for a longer period of time. And I was getting a lot of support, you know. It's tough for deaf people, but it seemed like things were going well, so they encouraged me to stay. And they approved that, signed off on it. There were 69. If you get to age 60, you can retire from the military. So some people up for life. Now I was 22 years old, and I hadn't been out in the world. They encouraged me to stay and work within the army. They approved that, signed off on it, and I was kind of set, so I was happy. And I finished my first year, and then my second year. I was in my 3rd year of service, and I got an email one morning. The president of the government invited 50 people, 50 hearing soldiers, and me, and we were given an award, a medal. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm getting recognition from the president? And all the other soldiers involved were hearing. I was the only deaf soldier recognized that way. Now, in Israel, they were from all over the country, all over Israel, and I was the only deaf soldier selected. And they said, in Jerusalem, they brought us to Jerusalem for the ceremony. And we marched in. We kind of rehearsed for 2 months, and the ceremony wasn't accessible to me. They didn't provide interpreters. I had to lip read, and they apologized to me. The army apologized. The military apologized to me. Out in civilian life, I could have gotten interpreters, but there within the service, I couldn't. They put me in the front row as if I could speak from them. But, you know, the ceremony went okay, and at least I was selected. Let me show you a photograph. Oh, the computer went to sleep. Oh, hang on, I need to get up to log in. This is at the ceremony. And that's the president. That was Shimon Peres then. And I received this medal, this award. My parents were so excited to see that happen. Like I said, there was a total of 50 people that year, and that was announced that the Army would be doing that, and I was so grateful. When I went back, I worked hard for another year. Now I was in my 4th year, but things were getting routine. Every morning I'd wake up, go to mass, do the same things every day. I felt like I was 50 years old. And I thought, whoa, I can be doing the same thing every day for my entire life. And end up that age in the military. It was kind of depressing. But they still encouraged me to hang in there. And just relax, you're doing fine. It's good. And then the next day I get up the same routine. The next day I get up the same routine. It was like 9 to 5, doing the same thing every single day. And my parents, like I said, had faced all these barriers and obstacles. They didn't have laws like the ADA here, and they didn't have rights. And I got to thinking, and I thought 4 years was enough. I told them I was going to separate from the military. They offered me a pay raise, and I said it wasn't about the money. And they told me, maybe they give me different job duties. I told them, I'm done. I'm done. I was as full could be. I was done. And they asked if I was sure, and if there was anything they could do to change my mind. And I was ready to go. I completed my 4th year honorably and said goodbye. In Israel, after you finish your military service, there's a ceremony where you kind of got your military ID with the scissors. And I said goodbye and I'm out of here. And we had that ceremony and off I went. I was thinking about university or college and went to get a degree, LLB. It's a law degree. And LL:B is a law degree from Israel. And I decided that's what I was going to do, to fight for rights for disabled people and deaf people. I traveled through Europe and I've been to America. And I thought when I finished my service, even before I entered the university, I wanted to travel. And I thought I'd travel Europe and I'd get to America. I remember the first time I came to America. and made some friends here. I landed in Australia, then flew to Los Angeles. Got to LA. I didn't know if they had buses or cars or how I travel around. A little car, I was expecting some kind of limo or bus. I was wondering what type of bus had arrived. And then the next morning, got to Los Angeles, to Beverly Hills. You're probably familiar with Beverly Hills. And I wrote Beverly Hills on a piece of paper. So when they asked me where to go, I didn't know directions for how to get there. I was looking for a bus. I asked, what bus goes to Beverly Hills? Someone pointed me in one direction. It was hot. People were sweating. And I was waiting, and no bus came along. And then finally, out of the distance, this vehicle pulled up and stopped. The doors open, and there was this old gentleman with white hair and a white beard. And he opened the door, started talking to me. I showed him Beverly Hills. I want to go to Beverly Hills. He said, his lips moved. I indicated I was deaf, mimed that I was deaf. He kind of wanted me to go back to the bench, and he tossed the paper away, picked up the suitcase. He dug around in the bag, came up with like a comb and started grooming his mustache away from his mouth and said something again. He was waving which direction I should go, and everybody's looking at me. So I put on my backpack and stretched off, and I thought, all right, tomorrow I'm renting a car. I'll rent a car and I'll drive myself. I think he thought the deaf people were traveling. I don't know what he thought. It was all right. There was all the numbers. He wanted to know the numbers. It was one of those experiences that led me to pursue law and to fight for rights. So, after 4 years, I was done. Was about halfway through. I got in with the President's Club. Oh, okay, she's from Israel. She came to watch the presentation to help people in Israel. Works with young deaf children there in school. And then there's evening activities and recreational activities, co-curricular activities to instill deaf pride. There's a deaf club. We set up a deaf club. Yeah. 2 to 1. From age 21? Up to age 21. And we wanted to fight for rights for deaf people. There was so much to do. I thought, there's all these obstacles and barriers we need to go after. The club's name was Shema. I signed Shema. Oh, I got my LLB, got my degree. And there were a number of clubs. What was the Shema? What are some of the other clubs? They're agencies, you call them. So we worked with agencies, Israeli agencies, 13 different agencies. And everyone I worked with was hearing. There were no deaf people involved. So we tried to get people to come join us. But deaf people were afraid to become activists and get involved. I had a couple of hearing friends out in the agencies, and we wanted to set up organizations all over the country to fight for rights for disabled people. So we set up Shema for the Israeli children, and I had my law degree. We started some other clubs for people who were deaf, and it was exclusively deaf people. We didn't have hearing people involved at all in this club, exclusively deaf, and focused on laws related to sign language. We suggested the government needed to provide sign language access to hospitals and schools, and that deaf people had human rights. Let me give you an example. Here in America, interpreters are free to deaf people. If you attend events or something, you don't have to pay for the interpreters. In Israel, we're limited to 45 hours a year of interpreting services. The government will fund me to hire interpreters for 45 hours. That's it, total. So you have your allotment of 45 hours, and when you've used those up, the government won't provide more support for interpreting. It won't provide any more funds to make interpreting available. And the individual has to handle those 45 hours. If you go to hospitals in Israel, perhaps you're sick or you need a medical procedure, or you go to the doctor's office, it's not sign language accessible. In Russia, they'll provide Russian language interpreters. They'll provide hearing. They'll provide hearing people interpreters for Arabic. French speakers can get French-speaking interpreters, but deaf people can't get sign language. You know, the doctor's office just isn't accessible. Like I said, there's a lot of barriers. Now there's some TV interpreting. There's 201 in Israel, in the parliament. Within the Israeli parliament, there's some bills moving through, but there's no deaf people in the Israeli parliament. There's a few disabled people. Some people with wheelchairs are in the parliament. There is no deaf people in the Israeli parliament. Just one more barrier, one more obstacle where we lack leverage. So, any questions at this point? Thanks, I'll open it up for questions.
All right, I have a few pictures that I'll show you. All right, this is one of the military pictures. You see us in our nice uniforms there. And this was when I was with the Air Force. And we had whites as well. And then we had the green fatigues and for the basic everyday stuff. And there were a lot of deaf in the Air Force. It was a lot more accessible. Not really sure why it came about that way, but it just was. Now, keep in mind that deaf people do not actively fight in wars in the military. We serve more as support personnel and work behind the scenes. Because, of course, in active combat, we wouldn't be able to hear and communicate effectively, even with technology, so we act more as the support personnel to make sure that equipment and supplies and whatnot are present as needed. All right, and a couple of my friends. And the three of us were in the military together. The
one has really spent a lot of time in the military. And I've known him a long, long time. But anyway. And this is a little bit of a video. This was my last day of military service. This small little get-together that we had. So I'll just go ahead and play that for you. Is it loud enough? Yeah, sorry, it's very, very loud. I can't hear it. I don't know.
You slide it down.
Okay, let's try this. And so this is the very last day. And they brought in an interpreter. Really? Really? My last day? And so we've got some gifts going around. It really gave me some mixed feelings there. It was very emotional having everybody there. Test, test. It's been 7 years now since I finished my military experience. And I'm noticing there are less deaf people involved in military than there were before. Mostly because of the struggles with communication and the lack of interpreting services. I think it's vital to have interpreting services there. I think if there were interpreters in the military, more people would serve, be it either in the Army or the government service. It doesn't matter. You have those two different tracks that you can choose from. The government track is more of a civilian role as opposed to the military track. The civilian track, you have the educational opportunities and all the rest of it. There, they provide interpreters. And so it's easier to get the access and the support that you need there for people who are deaf and other disabilities. But it's tough in the military track. We don't have that access. But it is still an option. People who can speak or have physical limitations can serve in the military branch, but more deaf people tend to go into the governmental track. So that's my life. I know that there are some people in the States that are starting that fight to allow people who are deaf to serve in the military. I think that's great. I think that there have been people who have won that case and have joined up. I'm not sure. I believe there was one person in the States who has managed to do that. But hopefully the day will come when you will all have that choice. So thank you. Thank you all. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, we do have a question for that. All right, if you want to stay there, we can have somebody who can, or come on up, sign from the front of the room.
Hello, thank you for this amazing presentation. I'm curious, with the deaf schools there, do they have primarily deaf residential schools, or is there, are they proponents of speech, spoken, or learning how to speech read or use their voice?
So in Israel, people who are deaf, there are 750,000 deaf and hard of hearing individuals around the country. 750,000. Of those, you have people who were older and lost their hearing later in life who do not sign. People who are hard of hearing who don't sign. People with cochlear or that don't sign, or people who lost their hearing from incidences who don't sign. So there is only 115,000 signers of that deaf population. And it's becoming more and more common for babies to be given cochlear implants. But there's also more signing going on with that as well. Doctors are still discouraging sign language and encouraging an oral method, but we're really arguing for a bilingual message. Also partly to improve self-esteem and self-confidence as well as language. Israeli babies, most of the babies who are born deaf are also born to hearing parents. And of course, the hearing parents need to grieve that deafness, and then when they're told that cochlear implants is an option, they tend to go along with that. The deaf culture in Israel isn't quite as strong. They don't tend to show the signing aspect of things and step up in that regard. And so the parents don't see that other option. It's just not presented to them. That's one of those things that we are fighting for, and specifically getting into the hospitals, having people who are deaf present when these babies are born to show the parents that there are options to cochlear implants, that signing is something that they can do. It's a step-by-step and a slow-step process, but we're making progress a little bit. And there is also people who use their voice when they sign. There's a communication method that's being taught, but it's not the best way to go about things. It's 3 years of study to get a bachelor's degree. And so where do you take sign language in that? And it's 84 hours in 3 years for 2 tracks. When you think about the government and the education that they require, and you think about adding another language into that educational system, is tough. But it's the same thing as with spoken languages. We need to encourage that. But governors are being a little stubborn, and they just don't want to listen to this and getting sign language in as a language that can be taught. They're just not willing to hear it, and yet at the same time, the interpreters aren't really there either. So,
Same thing, there's a lot of barriers here in the States too. People are still fighting for their rights here too.
yes, it is the same fight. Thank you for your question. Are there other questions? Any other questions? Would you want a selfie? All right, everybody wave. All right, well, thank you all. It's wonderful to see you. Thank you for coming. Really excited to be here.
Do you have a picture of your family with your husband?
Oh, let's see. I can show it to you. I'll show it to you later. I don't want to hold everybody else up. So,
I think you can probably swap it into the, connect it somehow.
I don't know how. next time I'll figure it out. Oh.
So maybe you could have someone take a video of the crowd, if you'd like. A 360.
Do you know how to do that?
Not a picture, a 360, like a panoramic or something.
Oh, good idea. Well, it's your idea though.
I'm just telling you what you should do.
No, the person behind me forced me to ask you.
Turn it off. Here we are in Rochester. Good idea. Where are you from?
Thank you. It was a fascinating presentation. I'm sure everyone enjoyed it, right? I've got a question. I just met a woman who's from Israel. She's Jewish, came here, named Eleanor Goldberg. Eleanor Goldberg. And she lived in New Jersey and California. She said she used to be involved in the Army and that she was the first deaf person. There's been deaf
people
people.
serving since, forever. I've met a lot of different people who have served. Dan, what's the last name?
Dan Sirkovich.
Dan?
Yes, Dan Sirkovich.
That would be my husband. And he was one of the first to serve.
Is that 40 years ago?
He started in 1974, joined.
Joined in 1974.
Joined in 1974
Joined in 1974.
7 years.
and served 7 years. Her
So
husband,
her husband was some of the first, or was one of the first to actually join the military. And so I was not the first, to be clear on that.
so that means in 1974, deaf people were in the Israeli army,
Yes,
but they didn't have communication access.
communication has always been a struggle, yes.
Huh. So, with that lack of access, from 1974 till now, and all those people who served, what do you see as leading to some improvement?
From the military?
No, I'm saying from 1974 to the present, have we seen changes or improvements, or imagine that long?
Okay, you mean what has changed?
For deaf access.
Right. Since deaf people have been involved with the military, it has always had issues. We've done a lot of different jobs in the military and constantly running up against barriers. People come in, but then they leave. Or some of them go through that CV track. And so we do that, and we join the military to get that service, because then after we are done, you are in a different category for your civilian life. And that having that paper and that certificate is vital to changing your life after. It's a sign of, you get a different sign of respect once you have this. And that is why many people want to serve. Although there have been many deaf people who have joined and then gotten out of service because of the communication. Also keep in mind education. It's a challenge, and if you don't have interpreters, what are you going to do and how do you communicate? And that impacts people's ability or their decision to join the military. It's very tough. You have to have have that internal toughness and that grit just to survive. It's not always a good life there, but it's a decision you have to make. And joining the military is one of the options that you have. And if you're accepted, it can change your outcome afterwards, and it opens a lot of doors. Plus, it gives you that feeling of being empowered and self-aware. And there are pros and cons with any decision, and you need to keep in mind all of those options. It's not for everyone, but it is an option on the table.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? It's also having that determination to say, I can, and knowing that it's going to change. I am still addressing things there. It's tough, but we still have to open that gate and get people in. We have to make changes. We still have to address hearing people who say, well, deaf people can't. And the point is, how do you meet the military people at the stage where they currently are in order to get that breakthrough? And Mossad is like the FBI, and that is starting to open up and let more people who are deaf in. But there are still barriers, and you can't always get everything that you want. And this is very new in Mossad. And then there was also, if you think about autism, they're also being admitted in as well. So people with a lot of other disabilities are also now being educated and being involved. Just even a year ago, some newspapers and pamphlets were distributed, which really put out some more information. And they do have some interpreters there. There are 3 that are there and provided for interviews and whatnot. And that was a first. So having those there is a big change, and that's starting to open a lot of doors. Do we have any other questions? Yes.
And this isn't necessarily about military service, but I'm curious, your role as a lawyer now, in Israel, do they recognize you as a bona fide lawyer? Do you have all of the same abilities as the hearing lawyers? You're a professional lawyer, right?
Yes, I am.
You said you're a lawyer, correct?
LLB. So in Israel, law school is 4 years, and the bar exam. I have not taken the bar exam yet. After I leave here, I will be studying for the test. It's a very, very difficult test. I'm planning on taking it in March. Everybody comes together to take these exams, and they are very difficult. There are a lot of people who have gone through law school who have yet to pass the exam. And people who have taken it recently have said it is very grueling. So there are 4 deaf people now who sign who have been through law school. 3 have already gotten their license. And I've looked at them and the work that they have been doing. 2 of them are no longer working. They've left the profession for other employment. And it wasn't what they wanted to do. The 3rd is working as a self-employed individual, opening up their own office. So I've been studying, and we'll see where it goes. I mean, my family is being very, very supportive. You've managed to get through the military, you've done this, and you've done that, and you've done the other. Go ahead, take the test. So what happens next? I don't know, we'll see. And I'm thinking about Parliament as well. And being able to address issues for people with disabilities and open the Parliament up.
I don't have a question, but I just want to know if, I just want to say you can do it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's great. Well, thank you all. And I will see you, let's see, it's like 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm gonna be flying to Gallaudet University. And then, what is it, Sunday. There we are. I fly to New York City for the day. And then back home. So, thank you all. It was great to see you all here. And have a good night. And we just want to say thank you for coming. We do have a little gift for you, a little token.